Cash-a-maniacs.
GeoGearHeads.
Welcome back to GeoGearHeads, episode 351. And this is our Randomize show, which is Chris of the Northwest's favorite type of show. But unfortunately, he got stuck in the meetings from Office Space, shall we say, and couldn't get out. So I'm Daryl W4, and we brought in our substitute, the monkey, who keeps the bad cop in line. How's that?
That sounds pretty good. I like that. I can work with that.
But since Chris of the Northwest is not here, we figure we should either call you Jay of the Southwest or not the Chris of the Northwest.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which one works.
I'm good with just not the Chris.
Not the Chris?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we'll go with that.
So, a nice throwback reference. A really, really lame show from the 80s.
It's the 80s. Was there anything but?
Well, I don't know. There was Saved by the Bell. That was a pretty quality program there.
Is that what they call it?
Yeah.
I didn't know that was called quality. Wow.
It was. Yeah, just like a quality podcast. Speaking of which, hey, it's an absolute pleasure to be back here. Thank you, Daryl. I enjoy Randomize shows. It's fun to see the things that people send in, the questions they send in by voice or email or whatever other medium they choose. And we get to make up answers that might even have facts involved in them.
Yes, but we don't want to encourage people to take anything that we say seriously enough to, warrant a fact.
Well, I would say people should take things Daryl says fairly seriously and take things that I say as amusement factor.
Yeah, I would say if you're going to pay attention to what we say, you do so at your own peril.
Oh, speaking of peril, I just realized during your intro that if I stare directly into the camera and blink in time to your theme song, I'm actually sending a Morse code message that means, help, I'm stuck in this camera.
Ooh, well, that's cool.
Yeah.
That sounds like something that we're probably going to see on the next Doctor Who.
It's a cool fact. There you go.
Well, let's actually kick off the boatload of feedback that we have with some email from Sir Tom. He said, hello again, GeoGearHeads. Still loving the show, and thank you for answering my previous questions. I now have a new one for you that might be interesting for your next randomize. So here we go. I'm a bit curious about letterbox hybrids. I want to hide one, but I'm a bit confused. In my area, here in Sweden, all the letterbox hybrids are of the type mystery/multi, often go to X number of meters with this bearing. I can barely find a letterbox that has a traditional with a stamp, even though the guidelines states that this is okay. Has this part of the guidelines recently changed, or do you have another explanation to why I can't find a traditional letterbox hybrid? I did not find a previous episode about letterbox hybrids. After a quick scroll through old shows, might be an interesting topic for a future show. I would think so, at least. Keep up the good work.
Oh, I've got opinions about this one, but do you have any thoughts you want to lead off with, Daryl?
No, go ahead. And then we'll get into my thoughts, but go ahead.
Okay, so letterbox hybrid, one would think that this means that the cache page will have instructions that you would take from a starting point to the ending point where the cache is, that follow the instructions like a letterbox. And when you get there, there should be a stamp inside the container and an ink pad and a book that you can put your own stamp in, thus being a letterbox hybrid, a geocache, which is like a letterbox. But in my personal experience, that might be about 20% of the letterbox hybrids. Most of them are traditionals with maybe a stamp in the box. This one, where it's a projection, I guess you're getting a little closer, but really, I agree. A projection is a mystery type cache. It should not be called a letterbox. But I mean, imagine if there's a stamp in it, you could get away with calling it a letterbox hybrid.
Yeah, this is what he's describing, not a letterbox hybrid. And I think the simple answer is the reviewers in this area probably just don't care enough about the definition that as long as you have to do something else, you're good. But the letterbox hybrid, by definition, is supposed to have the stamp. Doesn't have to have the ink pad, and I would recommend not putting the ink pad in there. Most of the letterboxes don't do that either because it creates mess. So stamp, book that you stamp, so it can't be like a little log sheet. It has to be a book of some type that's big enough to accept the stamps of the visitors. And it has to have the story. It's a
Yeah.
description of how to get there. And I guess it doesn't really need to be a story, but it's verbal,
Instructions.
or it's written instructions on how to get there that doesn't include necessarily they go this far in this direction. Usually it's about 5 paces, because this was the original geocaching, as it were, from hundreds of years ago. This is not the kind of uh, container and navigation that we're used to, even though it's come into the 21st century now.
Yeah.
But
Well,
the other part of the letterbox hybrid that people miss around here almost all the time is, according to the guidelines, you are supposed to have the final chords in the hint.
right.
And almost no one around here does that. And I wish they would, because so many times that I've done some of these older letterboxes, you start down the trail, you're looking for, let's say, a tree.
Right. And things have changed.
That tree is gone, or the bench is gone, and then you're like, oh, where was it supposed to have been? Because now I'm lost and I can't follow the story anymore.
Yeah. So
So
I've got a letterbox hybrid of that nature. Um, that's mine that I've hidden. And some of the things, there's one area in particular where things have changed, but people seem to be able to figure it out pretty quickly. They just skip that clue and they can see to the next clue. And so they just follow it along and they're pretty good. Plus, where the cache is hidden in the end is kind of obvious once you get into the general area. So generally, people don't seem to have too many problems with it. Although I think I need to go and do a maintenance run on it. I think the container is possibly borked, and getting into the fall. So
I was going to say, it's the time of year when you really want to get out and check on all your caches again anywhere. Do it at least once a year, twice a year, as the you hit those big season changes.
yeah.
Star Cacher, though, in the chat is saying that the projection instructions do qualify as letterbox instructions, and he's probably right. I'm sure that qualifies in the strict sense, and the reviewers have to let that go.
I think it's one of those things where it depends on the reviewers in your area. It's a what's the expression?
Your
RCA
mileage may vary.
yeah, no, RCA 777 has a great expression he uses. It's a global game played regionally, in the sense
This is
that
very true.
it is, right? And he's a reviewer, he should know. Um, but it's a great way of expressing it, in the sense that there are um, reviewers in areas who the reviewers in that region will generally align with each other in how they interpret the rules. But if you pick up and you go somewhere else, you will find things may be different. So it really, in the end, something like this particular scenario about the letterbox hybrids don't really feel like letterbox hybrids to me. Is probably regional, and if it's a real challenge, talk to your reviewers constructively, see what they have to say.
The one thing I will say with his particular issue, hide that letterbox hybrid that's a true letterbox hybrid. My guess is, if you have real letterbox hybrids with a story, with a stamp, and people start to find those, you're more likely to have more of that style hidden. However, letterbox hybrids aren't that popular because they are a lot of work. It's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work.
You know, it so that spins off into an interesting topic we probably don't have time for in this show, but I'd love to come back and talk about it later. And that's what types of caches tend to trend and others that sort of disappear. And it really seems to be regional. There's some areas that are just loaded with multis. And you go somewhere else and there's none. So it really, it's a fascinating aspect of the game.
Well, and puzzle caches are a perfect example of that. You go to areas like North Carolina, I think it is, like Raleigh area, there's tons of math puzzles. But you go to other areas where there's no puzzles, and the puzzles that are there are simple, like maybe you'll get a difficult Sudoku, but otherwise it's, maybe a word search or something fairly straightforward
Math
because you just
puzzles.
don't get people doing them.
Yeah. Math puzzles, keeping land monkey from finding them since 2002. Yeah.
Yeah, not ones I can do at all, but it's, you've got some very talented math geocachers that
Yeah.
can place these caches for fellow math geocachers in the areas.
There you go.
So, but the puzzles tend to vary, and there's areas where there's lots of puzzles and areas where there's not so many. I've been told that I want to say it's Stuttgart, but that doesn't sound right. In Germany, has more puzzles than they do traditional caches,
Could be. Could be a thing.
but they have no multis, if I remember. Basically all of the multis have been turned into puzzles. So you'll have the field puzzles,
Yeah.
and you'll have the solve at home puzzles, but unless it's pretty quick parking grab, it's not going to be anything but a puzzle cache there.
Oh, okay.
So certain areas get into certain things like that. It's fascinating, and I don't have stats or really any good examples I can point to, but I'd love to see someone go and try to isolate individual cities of note and tell us, what the caches are like in these key cities. Like I'm sure LA is totally different than Seattle.
Yes. All the caches in LA just spend the whole day staring at themselves.
They have their own mirrors and
Yeah,
selfie cameras.
that's right. Oh, I'm such an awesome cache.
Okay, let's move on
I
to
was
the
gonna say
next bit
all
of
the
email.
caches up in the Northwest wear flannel and socks with sandals. All right, moving
Interesting.
on.
So, I like the idea that they can come to you. So if you call for them when you can't find them, they'll come out and expose themselves. Oh, wait a minute, that sounds
Wait
bad
a
too.
minute.
Let's move on.
That's a different
Jersey
region
Eric.
of the world.
Jersey Eric emailed in. Thanks for asking my long-winded question on your recent Randomize episode. I have indeed found a solution using Garmin Basecamp 4.7.0. I already had Basecamp on my desktop, but I did not know that its graph view for a track existed. Just a few clarifications. I was only trying to use one recorded track from the GPS, not multiple, but it still seems awkward English to me to refer to one recorded track as track instead of plural tracks. I guess it only seems awkward to me. In general, no one says record your track or cover your track with a singular track except Garmin or geocachers.
Yes.
Let's see. The next bit is using a Windows 10 application like Garmin Basecamp was acceptable for me. So long as the app is free and cheap, I only highlighted the browser version of Map My Hike because it shows a great graph view of the track workout, whereas the Android app version of Map My Hike does not. Chris, who is not here, you are indeed correct. On my Garmin eTrex 30, I use the trip computer page heavily to note or verify cumulative distances that I intentionally want to measure before I start recording. My dilemma, however, was how to determine the distance to a specific point when choosing the specific point after recording the track. So he also sent a screenshot, which we're not going to include, but he did include that screenshot where he imported a single track into Basecamp, then manually added the waypoints for the footbridge to Basecamp using chords. The recorded hike does not cross the footbridge, but comes within 50 feet of the footbridge. In Basecamp, I double-click the balloon with the imported track's name, then switch from Properties tab to Graph tab. The Graph tab gives me exactly what I needed. I can use my mouse to move over the track and see cumulative distance wherever I focus on the track. Visually in Basecamp, I can see that this track nears the footbridge around 6.02 miles into the recorded track. That's what I needed to know.
Yeah, that's exactly the way I would have said that. Like, Basecamp is super powerful for stuff like that. I mean, it's kind of what it's designed to do. So that's probably your best way. I don't know of any GPSR where you can do that kind of functionality in the GPSR itself. I think you pretty much have to export the data and then work with it.
I haven't really tried to do too much of that in the GPS because it's not a good interface for it. I know you can do some of it in some of the GPSRs, or at least you used to. So you could probably find one of those older. I want to say it was like the Geckos even that did some of that, but those things were really terrible to work with. So it's the kind of stuff that really you want to be doing on the desktop or even like on a tablet, where it's a little bit bigger and easier to maneuver. So I'm happy that Basecamp worked for him. That's a great solution.
Yeah.
If you have a Windows or Mac desktop that you can, or laptop works as well, that you can actually work with. It's just not accessible on the tablet. There used to be Android and iOS versions of Basecamp, but they were not Basecamp. It turned into Garmin Connect.
Oh, okay.
Which is a better name for it.
Yeah, I didn't even know there was such a thing as Basecamp on tablets.
Yeah, the original, well, it's not, I don't think it actually supports tablets per se. It's a phone app, and it basically allowed you to get information in and out of your Garmin unit if it had the supported connections.
If it had the supported connections.
Right. So if you had and I'm working off of memory on something that I never really used. So I apologize if I mess it up. But Basecamp on Android, for instance, if you had the Ant Plus in the phone, which some phones on Android had, it would allow you to talk through Basecamp to Garmin Connect, which was the website at the time, to send your tracks and stuff back up to the website.
Okay, and I remember this now.
Yeah, I think it would go the other way where you could send like workouts, to the device, but it never handled geocaches.
So then
I think it did allow you to do your own custom waypoints, but not like geocaches. You could say, here's my home and upload it.
Right. Okay, well, good thing that that he got it all figured out. So Jersey Eric, congrats. Hopefully that's what you need to do, and your
anyone else looking for similar can use that as the model. Just go back to the last Randomize show, and you will get you'll get a lot more information about how that worked. Though we didn't go into a whole lot of detail and all of the effort he went to try to find that solution.
And he did, and it worked.
He did. Yes.
Life is good. All right.
Yeah, and this is one of those, it's just sitting on the hard drive. It's there and you just don't think about it.
Yeah, no kidding. I don't use Basecamp as often as I probably should, but every once in a while when I'm like, oh, I could use Basecamp for that, and I go in there, I get lost in it. Shouldn't say get lost in it. I get distracted in it for long periods of time because there are so many things you can do. So then I just start playing with stuff and screwing around, and I'm like, why did I come here in the first place? Which is pretty much my life. So,
well, I went into Basecamp about 2 or 3 weeks ago, partially when this came up, and I'm like, why do I have all these waypoints in there, and what the heck are they? It was a whole series of waypoints out of my Nuvi that hasn't even been powered up in probably 6 years.
It's like
I don't know.
It's like an ancient treasure map.
Yeah, to places I don't want to go back to, probably.
It's all the Chinese food restaurants I should never go back to. I made waypoints for them. All right.
Yeah. They're, big skull and crossbones. Don't go back here. Wed Coaster, though, had an email with a question you're really excited to get into. And he says, I hate when COs change the difficulty terrain rating after there are fines on it. If you come across a difficulty terrain 1-1 cache and it's clearly not wheelchair accessible, what do you do?
All right. So I get it that it's one question, but it's almost like it's a separate statement and then a question, because
Exactly.
I totally agree. When the DT rating is changed after the cache has fines on it, um, you run the unless it's like a 1.5, then it's like whatever, who cares? Because there's like a million 1.5, 1.5. So anybody who has like over 100 fines probably has at least 30 1.5, 1.5. So it's okay, generalization. So it's whatever. But Pareto principle, I'm pretty sure I'm right. So for the most part, yeah, don't change the DT ratings after you publish a cache. But I think what Coaster is saying here is that, there's the implied, however, there are scenarios perhaps when a CO has published a cache and it's incorrect. Now, interestingly, and again, this is back to my comment about a global game played regionally. Reviewers in my area are super picky about the terrain rating of 1. If you and the site now, I've noticed when you publish a cache, if you try and set the terrain rating to 1, you get a pop-up that says, "Hey, are you sure this is really wheelchair accessible, or are you just being an idiot?" And so
Hmm.
you have to say, "Yes, I'm being an idiot," and then it'll let you publish it. But um, so you got to really, really be trying to make a cache a terrain 1 to get a cache as a terrain 1, in my experience. So if it is a 1-1, and as what Coaster says, it's clearly not wheelchair accessible, the first thing I'm going to wonder is, how old is this cache? Because it might be old enough that it's before the whole terrain 1 being meaning wheelchair accessible was really enforced. Because I remember when I started playing this game, that really wasn't, it was kind of implied, but it wasn't really followed up on in any way. What do you think, Daryl?
Well, and one of the big problems is most people don't really understand what wheelchair accessible means.
Mhm. Yeah.
They think if you can get a wheelchair to the location, that's all it qualifies for.
That doesn't really help
So,
the person who's geocaching from a wheelchair, though, does it?
right, right. So they're missing the part of you might be in a wheelchair and get to the location, but how do you get the cache? The big problem here is getting to the cache and getting the cache signed and replaced.
Yeah.
So if it's on the ground, that's not wheelchair accessible unless maybe there's a pulley system or something to retrieve it. Same thing if it's like up a pole and there's a pulley system to retrieve it, that would count. But it generally, if it's on the ground or if it's above, like your shoulders, it's not going to be a 1. It has to be at least a 1.5.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, the big problem is we need more education for geocachers about what wheelchair accessible means.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. And what Coaster in the chat, he clarified that he's getting at what did he say here?
What
Uh,
happens when it's
what
clearly
when it's
a
clear.
wrong DT? Yeah.
He says he found this one he found this one recently, but it's a 5-year-old cache. So yeah, it probably predated the site changes around publishing caches and reviewers
Oh, it
being
absolutely did.
more
Yeah.
stickler about it. And so I think you would, in fairness, contact the CO. This is what I would do. I would contact the CO and say, "Hey, I see you got this rated as a terrain 1. Um, it might be helpful to others who are actually mobility challenged and geocaching for them to know that this isn't actually a terrain 1. Could you knock it up to a 1.5?" And I think some of the other comments in the chat is that, Owen from KC, increasing the DT is better or different than lowering it. I agree. And I think changing one from a 1-1 to a 1.5 is annoying, but I think the net result is better than leaving it as a 1-1, because you're going to put certain geocachers, you're going to frustrate people more, I think, with that than by bumping it up. And then, the 100 people who've already found it one of their stats moves over half a box.
Well, in something like a 1-1, it really doesn't matter because people have found so many 1-1s.
Exactly.
But typically, my recommendation to a CO who needs to change the difficulty or terrain rating because of changes in the environment is archive that cache and relist it as a new cache so that it doesn't mess with the ratings.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's the
Technically,
solution.
yeah, technically you're not really supposed to do that. It has to be a new hide. So go out and put a new container in, do your maintenance, and then do it. And that's typically a good thing to do anyway, because if stuff is changing that much, chances are that old container is no longer the best container for that location.
Yeah, I like that, Daryl. That's the solution right there. There you go.
Well, but here's the problem. This is a
No,
5-year-old
no,
cache.
there's no problem. It's perfect. Leave it.
But with these older caches, you don't necessarily want to archive them because it might be the only one that does it, for the Jasmers. So you want to
Not a
be a little bit
5-year-old
more.
cache. 5-year-old cache? That's
No,
not going to be a Jasmer cache.
well, you'd be surprised at how often in some areas caches are getting archived. So that's one of those. If there's at least, I'd say, a dozen other 5-year-old caches in that month, fine, just get rid of it. But you're getting into, at 5 years, you're starting to get into that territory where in certain areas you see cache turnover that's probably going to preclude you from, or I shouldn't say preclude, but you're probably going to want to leave it so that people can fill in their Jasmers.
Yeah.
In other areas, it's not a problem.
So Bounce in the chat said, but you'll lose all the favorite points. And I don't think so. I think it snapshots. So as the CO, you still, if you're tallying total favorite points on all of your hides, that it stops right there. You don't lose those favorite points.
Right, but the new cache wouldn't have the favorite
But
points.
the new cache would have 0 and it would start over again. Absolutely. So you would lose the visibility of favorite points for that cache. But it also depends. I'm guessing if it's a 1-1, that should probably be 1.5, maybe not. A 5-year-old cache might not have a
Yeah,
lot of favorite
really,
points.
with that example of a 5-year-old 1-1 that should be a 1.5, I would just say change it. That's not that big a deal. Everyone has way too many 1s, 1.5s, everything in that combo. Just don't worry about it. Just change it.
Daryl's advice: don't worry about it. Change
Yeah, it's when you get into some of the tougher ones, but you want to get into a bigger, nastier discussion on the terrain and difficulty. Earlier in my caching career, we had a bunch of geocaches which would change terrain ratings based on the season or difficulty ratings. Because, for example, you can walk to this cache in the winter, but you needed to have a boat to get to it in the summer.
Right. So it's
so they'd actually change it. Other ones would be buried under snow, so they changed it to a difficulty 5.
right. So it's somebody
And
not
at the
understanding
time,
the big picture of the stats and trying to be helpful.
well, this is before stats were a big thing.
Right.
This is when you'd go out and find, if you were lucky, 5 caches in a day.
Yeah.
So things have changed. Back then, that was considered being a good cacher.
Right.
Today, now you're annoying everyone by being a good cacher. So
Well,
you certainly don't want to take those caches and archive and relist them every season. However, you don't want to be changing the difficulty and terrain, and maybe you just put something on the cache page that this is easy in the summer and hard in the winter, or vice versa.
exactly what I was going to say. Just put it in the description, and if people choose not to read the description before they go to try and get to ground zero, oh well. You can't babysit everybody.
Yeah, you're going to always upset someone, but I think, in my opinion, the best thing to do, really, if you have an environment change that's mandating the change in the difficulty and terrain, like I've had shrubs grow up around the caches that make it almost impossible to get there. Okay, that warrants, changing the cache. Archive relist.
Right. Okay. Well, should we move on?
Let's move on.
All right. So via the website, Sir Tom sent in, I've been looking into getting my first GPSR for a while now. Right on, man. Way to go. Said, I was thinking about the GPS Map 64S or the Oregon 700. I'm still going through old episodes from Use Guys and just listened to episode 251 about GPSR picking, where the question about exactly these two GPSs had been asked. I came to the conclusion that the GPS Map 64S would be the best for him right now, but it is a 4-year-old model and he can't find anything official about GPS Map 66 in the works. Question for you, Daryl. Have you heard anything about new Garmin units on their way? And do you think it's worth waiting for a new unit at this point? Seeing as it's been a long time since the last units were released.
And when he emailed this, I had to tell him that I didn't know if there was a new unit coming, but I expected if we did hear, it would probably be February or January of 2019. But typically the 60s and 70s go for years without updates. That's normal. They're a higher end product that's built to be more rugged and doesn't get frequent updates. Certainly not like a cell phone. But even the E-Trex, you don't see that many updates for it. So things have changed since that email, and we'll get into another email in a second. But the 700, the 750s, yeah, I don't really like those so much. I would definitely go with the 60 type line because I like having those buttons, and it is a better all-weather GPS in my opinion. Touchscreens are great, but they don't do well with rain.
Yeah.
And they don't do well with cold.
I hate touchscreen, any technology for outdoors. I refuse to use touchscreen technology. And my only option when it comes to smartphones is a smartphone. There's not a touchscreen or a button-based smartphone. Well, there is. It's called a BlackBerry, and nobody uses them. But
well, I don't think the Blackberries are even fully button-based. That you still have to use a touchscreen.
The latest one, but you could still get the Curve or whatever it was, the last version of BlackBerry that had an actual little keyboard on it. Well, you
had the keyboard, but I thought you still had to have you still had to use a touchscreen. It didn't have the directional
the little
to get around
anymore. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's gone.
So it still required use of the touchscreen, but you didn't need the touchscreen for typing.
Yeah, there you go. So my advice would be go with the unit that is going to be the most ruggedized, and that's going to be the unit that's going to have buttons, so that when you're out in the cold rain, or unless you're a fair weather cacher, you're only ever going to go out when it's perfect, great, beautiful weather out, then fine, get what you're going to get. But if you're going to get a unit that's going to go out in any kind of weather, and you want it to be reliable, or as reliable as possible in those conditions, I would really say go with the button-based unit. I'm a huge fan of my E-Trex 30X. I won't use anything else. And yeah, so there you go.
I do like my 30. That's my favorite GPS right now, which is the 30. 30X is basically the same, just a little bit better.
Yeah, it's upgraded firmware.
However, the newer GPSRs do have some advantages. So before we get into that part of the discussion, why don't you read the next email?
All right. So the next one's from Dune Buddy, and it says GPS Map 66 ST. I just bought a replacement GPS Map 64 a couple of months ago.
So yeah, he happened to buy the GPS just outside of that return window, I'm sure. And Garmin went and replaced the 64 with the 66. So we do have the 66 officially released, but not shipping. So the 64ST, which includes the topo maps, is 450 US, and the 66S is 400 US.
And what is the S for?
That's just the full featured model, basically. It includes the barometric altimeter and 3-axis compass. So typically they would have a 66. They don't right now, and I would imagine they're not going to do it this time. But that is missing the barometric and the barometric altimeter and the compass is
There you
just
go.
going to be electronic,
We've
which
got
is good if you're just trying to get tracking and that kind of thing. Not so good for the people who are out doing outdoor, hikes and that kind of stuff. However, as cheap as that stuff has become, thanks to their popularity in like smartphones and what, I think you're not going to see that base model this time. It's just going to be these two.
right on. And
There's also not one with a camera either.
yeah, they stopped doing that a while ago, eh?
No, they still do it, and the 750 series has those.
Oh, okay.
But I think that's what it is. At this point, it's only going to be those, and for the really rugged ones, they're just not going to bother. There's
Yeah.
not enough demand, most likely.
That's
I
what I was
don't
saying.
have sales numbers.
Most people either, they're like super into photography and they're carrying a camera with them, or they have a smartphone anyways, like I do. And I use the smartphone for the camera. I don't want a camera in my GPSR.
Yeah, well, the camera in the smartphone still has your geotagging, so you still have that information, and it's going to be much higher quality than what you have in here. So it really doesn't make much sense to have it in the phone, not the phone, but the
The
GPSR.
Yeah. And Roger in the chat said the S equals sensors. So there you go. Thank you. So the S
Yes, yes.
sensors. I knew T was topo maps, and then there's
Yep.
there's another letter they throw on sometimes.
There's the C that was the camera version,
Oh, okay.
and there were X's that were the expandable versions when they had a non-expandable, if I remember.
Okay.
They use the X for upgraded models as well, like the 30X. So it's changed meaning over time as well. However, getting back to the feature set of the 66, this does include the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi, kind of like the 750 series does.
Okay.
So we don't, at least when I looked a week or two ago at the website, have a manual or anything for me to see what they're actually doing with that. But I'm assuming it's going to be the same as the 750s. So you can go on your Wi-Fi at home, download your pocket queries without needing a computer. This is huge since so many of us don't even turn on the computer on a daily basis anymore. How else are you going to get the pocket queries and caches into your unit? Well, now you can just fire it up and log onto the Wi-Fi and do it that way. You can also do it in the field, which hasn't worked for me on the 750 because it's got that weird bug where it throws off the internal phone GPS. But I'm very excited to see what this is and if they fix those kind of problems. And I believe when I was looking at the specs, I didn't write it down. It does support Galileo.
Oh, wow. That's new.
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
And a lot of phones are doing that now too. Almost all of the new phones being released support the Galileo system. I don't think they're actually using it on most of the phones yet, but it supports it.
Cool, man.
So in a future update, they'll turn it on.
There you go. All right. Hey, you had an email from Hide Go Seek. Want me to read it to you?
Let's go for it.
All right. So Hide Go Seek says, "Hello, Daryl.
Hi.
I came across a video of you using an Apple Watch for geocaching. Daryl, you're such a nerd. All right. It says, but it was recorded before caching was available for the watch. I have three questions. If you have time, do you have time, Daryl?
I do have time.
Okay. Then we're going to go for three questions. Question number one, what size watch are you using in the video?
That is the 42 millimeter. And he says, this is the Apple Watch. And in the video, it was the Series 0, as we call it, the original Apple Watch.
Of course
They
it
came out
was.
with the Series 1 that was the slight update, then the Series 2, and I now have the Series 3 40 millimeter because my Series 0 kind of didn't really work anymore. It's still functional, the battery just didn't last.
Oh, okay. There you go. All right. Next question. What band do you think is best for the outdoors? I think Rush is one of the best bands for the outdoors. Daryl, what do you
I don't think that's what he's talking about. Oh, and we missed another part of the previous question, so let's jump back real
Oh,
quick.
okay.
He said he thinks he might like the 40 millimeter size,
Oh, right.
and my recommendation is if you are looking for an Apple Watch, go to an Apple store. They'll be happy to put one on your wrist and see. You'll be surprised that there isn't that much of a difference between the current Series 4 has the 44 or the 40 and the 44 instead of the 38 and the 42. They're
For
the
the
same
size of the
bands.
watch. Okay.
Right. It's the outside width.
Okay.
You'd be surprised how much nicer it is if you have a bigger wrist to have that bigger watch. If you have that 40 millimeter, that works beautifully for my wife. Well, she's got the 38. But for me, when I put her watch on, my wrist is a little too big, and even the bands, I'm like at the very edge to get it to close. And with the size of the sensors on the back, I like having that extra size. It really is a lot more comfortable for me. As for the bands, I do like the Sport Loop. I don't actually use one though. My wife loves it, uses it all the time. It's like a Velcro band. And the thing that I don't like about that is when you're going through burrs, guess what happens to us? Basically a hook and loop watch band. The one I actually use is a little harder to come by now, and that is the nylon weave, I think is what they call it, or the nylon mesh. So it's a nylon fabric, and it's amazingly durable. It actually does breathe a little bit, which I miss about like the silicone bands. Silicone bands don't breathe at all.
No.
However, they are very durable, and you don't have to worry about any water. So, silicone
So,
bands are fine, but I prefer the nylon mesh or the nylon loop.
all right. So since we're talking about watch wristbands and not rock bands, which is incredibly disappointing for me, but I'll just play along here. Um, these bands that you're talking about, Daryl. So we're talking about specifically bands for the Apple Watch, and are these all bands
Correct.
that Apple supports, or are these third-party things?
Both. They're like families. Apple has the nylon loop that you can buy the watch with, and they also have the nylon mesh, which used to be available with the new watches. I don't think it is anymore. I think they've switched entirely to the nylon loop, or sport loop is what it's sometimes called as well, or the silicone bands with some of the sport watches. So there are some options that are included with a watch, and then you can get the other ones like the nylon mesh on the shelf from Apple or from the store. But you can find some of these that are really pretty good quality for so much less money on like Amazon. And I have a few of those, but the ones that I really prefer are the Apple ones because they're just really, really well done. And for like the nylon mesh ones or nylon weave ones, it's not cheap. They're like $50, and getting a good one off of Amazon is at least 30. But the one that I got from Amazon, which is one of their better ones, it didn't wear as well, and it actually started to break down. The one that I've got on now is actually a year and a half old, and it's a little dirty, but otherwise in great shape.
All right. Daryl and the Dirty Watch Band.
Sounds like a band that we should actually make if we had any musical skills.
Speak for yourself, my friend. All right. Hey, next
Yeah,
question. So,
you might, we don't.
okay, fair enough. Third question, and we have time for all three questions. This is amazing.
We do.
The third question is, does Cashly work well with the watch? And this is a great question.
It really does, but don't plan on it being a replacement. It is a accessory, and the nice thing about it is you go on the watch. You can do your base routing to a cache, get moving in the right direction. It does have some maps to get you going in the right direction. You'll get your time, your distance. When you're at the cache, you have your phone in your pocket. You bring up the description, the hint, that kind of stuff to look for it, and even do logging with voice memos. Essentially, it's a voice to text. So some really awesome stuff, but it is not the guide you to the cache. You're going to want a GPS or your phone to do most of that. But I have done some tests, and okay, I look at the cache on the uh, phone itself, put the phone away until I get there, and just rely on GeoSense and using the satellite view to kind of locate where it should be. And I found the cache. You're not going to be able to do that all the time, but it certainly saves battery on the phone, which is nice. And the better thing for me is I can go live streaming on the phone and still get the information on the watch. Or what a lot of people have done is play Pokemon Go or Ingress or Garfield Go or whatever on the Munzie on the phone, and just use the watch for navigating and logging the geocaches.
Nice. There you go. So that's pretty cool. I have never tried doing that. I know a few people who have, with varying levels of success, and I think it depends on how much effort you want to put in up front to make sure that your devices are properly connected and getting accustomed to that methodology.
I
But I
was
think
going to say, it's really a matter of, is it going to work with your caching workflow
right.
and the way that you cache? As for getting it connected, there is no getting it connected really. As you just have the Cachely installed. Most people have whatever watch apps installed with the app on the phone installed anyway. So maybe you have to go and turn it on if you don't
Okay.
have that default set. But once the Cachely app is on, it's just on. There's no real connection. It does let you do searches from your current location right on the watch. It also says, as one of the options, take me to the cache that I'm navigating to on the phone. So you don't have to do any searches on the watch.
That's
But
cool.
even on the series 1 or 0 watch that I had, it worked. So
Very
it's a nice device
nice.
or
Right.
app.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and Nick Hubbard from Cashly, I'm looking forward to seeing him next weekend at GeoCoin Fest in Seattle. So that'll be fun. Good product, Cashly,
Yeah, and great guy.
and a great guy, absolutely. And so speaking of great things, Hide Go Seek finishes the email with a statement or two. Says, I really like the idea of the new heart functions and the fall detection feature. And I guess they're talking about the Apple Watch, not Cashly.
Correct. This series 4.
Okay. And they said, the last time I fell in the woods, I broke my leg. Holy crap. That's quite the fall in the woods.
Mm-hmm. And this is one of those ways that geocaching and technology in general has just changed over time. We had a cacher in this area probably 10 years ago who slid down a hill and broke his leg in one of the parks,
Okay.
and he couldn't get out. He
Right.
had no one to call because he didn't have a cell phone, or maybe he had the cell phone and he cracked it or whatever. He didn't have any way to contact anyone, and he's just stuck out there in the middle of the woods. So now we have these devices like cell phones that in most cases are going to help you when you have a problem.
Okay. So this is not something I'm familiar with, this fall detection feature.
Okay.
I'm not clear on how the phone detects that I fell.
No.
Great.
This is not the phone. This is
On
uh,
the watch.
the watch. The Series 4 watch has fall detection.
So it knows I fell.
It knows you fell. If you don't move for 1 minute, it will call 911
Oh, really?
and contact your emergency contacts that you've specified.
Ah, now that's
But
useful. Okay.
within a second or two of having fallen, it starts asking you if you would like to make an emergency call. But if you don't move, if you're immobile, it's going to make that call for you.
That's pretty cool.
Very, very cool. We don't really know how many types of falls it's going to handle. They made a big deal talking about it, that they did a bunch of measurements and discovered that most of the time when people fall, it's, arms moving forward, blah, blah, blah. So they have this motion profile that they're looking for. If you slide down a hill, I want to know, is that going to be detected as a fall?
Yeah. Is it
It
like
may not
rapid
be.
descent? Like if
Right.
you're wearing it and you go skydiving, or the paramedic's going to be waiting when you land and you're going to be
That's a good question. That's a very good question. But I would assume you have a way. Well, you can always turn it off, but I would assume you have a pulse that's indicating that you're exercising, and maybe it's not going to care.
I just
Or
jumped out of the plane. Trust me, I am going to have an elevated pulse.
exactly. So I really don't know. It's no one's had a chance to really do anything with this because it hasn't even been released yet. It's only been announced.
Uh,
I'm really looking forward to hearing about that and the ECG feature.
so there you go. So Daryl, when it comes out, we want you to go out in the woods and fall down somewhere and see how it works.
Sadly, I'm not going to be buying one because I can't afford to buy that. I
Ah,
just replaced mine not too long ago with the Series 3. But I'm sure we're going to have a lot of people testing it and seeing where its limits are. And we're probably going to see some updates to change it because it's all done in software. There's no hardware changes that would be necessary because it is just taking those measurements and comparing them to the profile that it's built through the AI.
I do like the fact that it asks you, do you want to make this emergency call?
Right. Well, and this is kind of where I was going with the whole thing on the watches or on the phones too, is almost every phone now has an emergency feature. Like
That's true.
HTC, was it? Maybe it was Huawei. If you squeeze the phone really hard, we'll call 911 if you don't cancel it, or
Right.
emergency services. The Apple phones, it's like you grab the power and volume buttons and it does the same thing. So
It's
essentially the
kind of the same
squeeze.
idea. Yeah. And my Samsung
Right.
has a similar feature. Yeah.
Right. Almost all of them have some kind of squeeze function. It's an emergency help. I need someone here now and I can't operate my phone.
Yeah.
The watches have similar features a lot of the time as well. Not typically as robust as the phones have been. So I'm excited to see that we're starting to get more attention paid to that because there was a situation just just at the beginning of the spring, I think, where someone got into a car accident and couldn't get to her phone and remembered she had the Apple Watch and hit the buttons on the Apple Watch and called and got help.
That's cool. Good story.
Yeah. So these things are helpful. Don't count on them to save your life, but they very well could. How's that?
Very cool.
With that, I think we should wrap it up because we are getting almost to that hour mark, and we have yet another show to do for the patrons, including the GPS-3 satellites actually ready for launch, and Alexa ordering donuts for you on request.
Seriously?
Seriously, and
For me?
you know what else for you? Well, actually, no, because you're in Canada.
What else?
But how would you like a crow to pick up some trash for you?
Well, you know what? If you come into the patron show, I'm going to talk about a very special crow in Vancouver that picks up more than just trash.
I think I know roughly what you're getting at. So I'll be excited to hear that story because I always love those.
Awesome. Well, folks, we want to remind you to check the Cachamaniacs website at cachamaniacs.com for more on the GeoGearHeads, including show notes for this and all of Daryl's amazing episodes. We love hearing from our listeners, so send us feedback by emailing geogearheads at cachamaniacs.com or through any of your social medias. Your support helps to keep the Cachamaniacs shows coming, so please consider becoming a patron through the link on the website to support the Cachamaniacs shows. GeoGearHeads is produced by Chris Umpenauer and Daryl Wattenberg. The show is copyright 2018 by Daryl Wattenberg, all rights reserved.
Cash Maniac.